Welcome back to Admin Prep with Dark Knight Admin. And today we're going to talk about configuration and setup. In this section, we're going to find a couple of different things. The first thing on the list is company settings. Then we're going to talk about some other things like the app menu, list views, global actions. We'll talk about potential scenarios and when we should use setup and maintenance for users. We're going to explain some various organization controls like setup audit trail, login hours, session settings. We'll also cover org defaults, sharing. So sharing in general doesn't cover how that works. And then we'll also talk about when we should use a custom profile and permission set and when those use cases are good. First things first, company settings. This is your company information. This is information about your company. This is where we can see your fiscal year. This shows your licenses. This is your business hours and holidays. This is where you can manage your currencies. If you have more than one currency enabled, this is where you do that. And this is also where we can set up our trusted IP range. Here's just an example of the company page. As you can see, we have our name, the primary contact, your default locale, your default language, your default time zone, your corporate currency that comes into play later on. This is where you'd also see your Salesforce ID, what edition you're on, your instance, how much data you used, how much file space you've used. This is also where you could enable multi-currency. So you'd have to check that box to set that up. You can also see where your address may be, and then you can also set some of your other company settings within that page. On that same page, if you were to scroll down a little bit, you'd also then see your company settings, all your licenses. So it tells you the type of license you have, how many are used, how many remaining, and if they expire. So if you have some that are expiring, it'll tell you that these are just Salesforce licenses, not third-party licenses. If you want to set up a trusted IP range, just want to make note that you can set up trusted IP ranges. This allows users that are in the range to not have to authenticate. It still asks for username and password, but no verification. A little side note, if they're outside of the IP range, they can still log in. They just need to verify with whatever the company's verification tool is. To set that up, you would go to your quick find, type in network, select network access, then set up your IP range. So you need your start and your end, and then hit save. And then anybody that's within that range doesn't have to authenticate with the company settings through the trusted IP range. The company, the fiscal year for company settings here, typically the standard one follows the Gregorian calendar. You can customize it if need be. You can create your own custom fiscal years. Some of the more common ones are the 445 model or the 13 period structure. Basically allows you to set your start, end date, and how many quarters, all that fun stuff. So you can set all that up within the fiscal year underneath the company settings. Business hours and holidays. This is used for your support process. So this is primarily used with cases, but you set it up in your company settings. Basically defines when your support process is active. So for each of the days here, you specify when you're available. You can do 24 hours. You can set time limits like Monday and Tuesday. And you can also add holidays. Basically, these days are the days that you have off. You can set reoccurring holidays. If you want to turn on managed currencies, you can do that. You can first you must enable it through company settings. So you have to turn it on. Once it's on, it's on. There's no turning it off. You can create multiple currencies and then you can always reduce it down to one. But once you turn multi-currency on, it's on. It's not something you can turn off. So that's one thing to always know. Test this out in the sandbox first if you're going to enable multi-currencies to see if you like it. And then if you like it, then you can move forward. Advanced currency management is a nice little tool that allows you to set a rate of time for a period. You do have to set it up. Essentially, if you want to say between January 1st and April 1st, any of the opportunities that are closed within this time frame will follow this particular exchange rate, you can set that up. So you can set up your exchange rates for different time periods so that they don't change. Otherwise, if you just use one standard currency, when you do that conversion rate, and if you change that conversion rate, it's going to change it for all your records. So all your conversion rates are going to change. So if you want to have a set in time for that particular what that period was, you have to set up advanced currency management. Or else you'll learn the lesson like I've had to learn in the past is if you update those rates and you don't have that set in place, you can gain or lose on the exchange rates. So just be mindful of that going forth. Set up audit trail. This is where you can watch all the metadata changes within your org. It will show your most recent 20 logs, but you can download up to 100 days worth of logs. So you can see the past 180 days worth of all the edited changes that have happened in your org. So you can see if custom apps were built, if tabs were built, if things are deleted. You can track all that there in your audit trail. So just be mindful, 180 days worth of logs, and you only see the most recent 20 that are available. Underneath UI settings, there's a lot of different settings that you can turn on, which could be enabling collapse selections, show quick create. So you can do quick create. Some people turn this off right away because sometimes this doesn't always do what you want, and maybe creating things that doesn't always follow validation rules and other things of that case. It doesn't always require things to be entered. If you want to enable hover delete, that's a common one. Inline, enable inline editing. So if you want to do that, if you want to inline edit in your records, you need to turn that on. Enhanced list, if you want that turned on. Some of the other ones are you can enable printable list view. So if you want to print, you want to be able to like have a printout of things, you can turn those things on. You can turn it off. If you don't want that to happen, you can enable the Salesforce notification band or turn it off depending on what your org does. You may want that on, you may not want that off. For your sidebar, if you want to be able to collapse it, you can turn that on or you leave it as is. So that's up to you if you want to have the sidebar be able to collapsible or not. And then for calendar, you can enable a homepage hover links for events. You can drop and drag editing calendar views. You can also enable click create events and calendar views if you want. You can also enable the click links for my task. If you want to change in the name settings, so if you want to use middle names or suffixes for person names, you can enable that as well here. And then there's some additional UI settings and setup here. You can enable enhanced page layout editor and enable streaming API, dynamic streaming channel creation. This is a great one. Enable set of audit fields, record creation, record updates, and inactive owners and user permissions. We'll come back and talk about this in the future. If you're doing a lot of data loading into your org and you want to put in historical data, typically you want to turn this on so that you can actually update some of those old permissions. And then if you have users in the system that you want to assign records to, you probably want to turn this on as well so you can assign those permissions to that particular user loading the data so that when you create the data, you can assign it to the correct person, and you can also backdate it for when the record was actually created. And then you can also enable your advanced setup search there, or any other advanced settings in there as well. The Lightning App Builder. The Lightning App Builder provides an easy graphical interface to create custom Lightning pages. So this is where you create your Lightning pages for Salesforce Lightning Experience and mobile. Lightning pages are built using Lightning components, compact, configurable, and reusable elements that you can drag and drop in regions. All right. The next thing here, we're talking about session settings. This is where you can set the session security and session expiration timeout for your organization. So you can say, if I want my session to time out after 2 hours, you can do that. You can do an hour. And you can disable the warning, or you can leave the warning on so you can warn the person, say, hey, you're going to be logged out. You can also enable caching and autocomplete. This is one of the things that enable secure persistent browser caching to improve performance. I always turn that off in sandboxes. Essentially, that means that it doesn't cache everything. So every time it loads a page, it's going to give you the most current version of the pagelet that you've set up. If you are in production, you probably want to have that on. Sandbox, I turn it off so I can see the updates quickly. So if you're making a lot of updates to your pagelets, you might want to turn that off to see the new updates, to force them, and then you can turn it back on when you're done with that. These are some of your identity verification ones that you can dive in a little bit deeper. You can set up Lightning login, just some additional security settings that you can set up for yourself. Depending on your org, you may want them on, you may want them off, depending on what you're doing. Typically, Salesforce recommends you turn on as many that you can to protect your org. If you want to set up session security levels, you can specify which ones are your standard. With the Lightning App Builder, you can build apps, app pages, home pages, and record pages. And within the app menu, you can see you have a bunch of different apps, which could be platform, sales, service. These are common ones. Any additional apps that you build for yourself would be here as well. This is also under the global actions. This is where these are your global actions that are at the top of your page in your little gear. You can set up all your different global actions. These are what take place. They can't reference a record. They can just, most of the time, you just create a record, maybe create a call and a flow. They're just actions that are at the global level that you can launch from any object in your org. It's not really launching from the object, you're launching from your browser. So if you're wondering where those global actions are, they're up here on that little plus sign. You click that plus sign, all your global actions show up. Actions allow you to do anything from any page. Like I said, global actions can pull values from the page. So everything you build in here will be net new. And then for list views, most objects tabs, and I think of it as a mini report. So here we are looking at an account list view. You can see that it's got the names of the account. It's got some different fields in here. It's got our phone number, type. This is just a little truncation of you can set up from the setup here. You can create a new one. You can clone. You can rename. You can also set up your edit. You can set your filters and your fields to display. So if I create a new one here, I can specify who can see this. So I can say only I can see this list view. That means if somebody else comes to this object, they won't see this list view that I created. If I have the ability, I can also create a list view for everyone, or I can say I want to share it with a group of users. So I can specify who can see this list view. Once we have that created, we can set up our filters. By default, you can it's going to filter by owner. You can say all accounts. You can say my accounts or my whatever record it is. And then you can also add a new additional filter. So you can add filters if you want to have, say, my open accounts or my new accounts. You can set those additional filters on the list view. So this is, we're saying the account currency equals, and we can select some of the options that we want in that particular scenario. Once we have that, this is kind of what we've done here. So you can see I have my owners, I have my billing city equals in New York, I have my filters in place. Now I can select which fields I want to display. So the columns here, I can select which ones I want by selecting the list view here. Once I open it up there, I'm just gonna, these are available fields. These are the ones that I want. I grab the ones I want from over here, push them over here. And then if I want to change the order in which they display on here, the first one here is gonna be the first one right here. You can just click it here and move it up and down with those toggles right there. Next is user setup. First thing first is username. It needs to be in the form of an email. The alias you can set up pretty much how you want. A lot of times it's first initial, first four of the last name. Within the user license here, you can specify the types of licenses. So there are different types of Salesforce licenses out there. Salesforce is the most common, but there's platform as well that's common. You set up the profile. This kind of tells you what the user can do in the org. Roles kind of tell you what you can do in the org. Any other feature licenses like marketing user or service cloud can be turned on here. So I can click marketing user, which means I have the ability to create marketing materials. So I can create campaigns. Even if my profile says I can create campaigns, if I don't have this checked here, I can't access the campaigns. This is also where I could set some locale settings and my newsletter settings as well if they weren't set at my company level. Some things to think about underneath user management. This is where you create and edit users. This is where you can reset passwords. You can grant additional permissions. You can create and manage your users here as well. You can add up to 10 users at a time, just to be mindful of that. Outside, you can data load many more users if need be. If a user locks themselves out, you can unlock them. You can also deactivate users. So just as a reminder, you deactivate users, you don't delete them. You can't delete them. You don't also repurpose licenses. So if Bill was working, and now Susie takes over for Bill, you don't change Bill's user record. You create a new record for Susie. So that way you have that historical reference of everything that Bill did, because we don't want to come in and put Susie on there, and then Susie is now being credited for creating things before she even started at the company. Freeze and unfreeze. If you freeze a user, that means they can't log in. It still consumes a Salesforce license, but it does not. It allows everything to work or everything else. It just prevents that user from logging in. So a lot of times when a more senior person is let go or leaves, they may freeze that user initially so that they can't log back in. They change everything around so that the new person is good to go, or however they're going to do it. And then once that everything's been handed over and updated, then they will unfreeze the user or deactivate the user at that point so that they can't log in anymore at that point. And you gain back that license. So typically your best practices when a new user leaving, you freeze them first, make sure everything works as you desired, and then go ahead and deactivate them. When you deactivate a user, There's a couple of things that you can do. You can remove users from account teams. You can remove them from opportunity teams of closed opportunities. You can also remove them from opportunities of. So a deactivating user also removes them from all delegate groups and sharing privileges as well. So if once you deactivate them, if there's a sharing with that person, it gets removed. Some things to think about when deactivating user. User license and billing does not account against the user license, but you are still billed for it. Just be mindful if you purchase 20 licenses and you only use 15, you still pay for 20 licenses. If that user is in a custom hierarchy field, you can't deactivate that user if until that user gets removed out of that hierarchy field. Workflow email alert recipients, they can't deactivate a user if they're the last person in that email alert. It says workflow, same thing will apply to flows as well. Customer portal admin, they can't deactivate a user if the user is a customer portal admin. You just have to change who the portal admin is. Record access, user loses access to the records that were manually shared or shared as them. Users higher in the record also lose access to the deactivated user's account. Typically, the best practice when you deactivate a user is to reassign ownership of the records so that somebody can see those records. With chatter, they will be removed from the following followers list. If they are reactivated, that list will be restored. So you get everything back in that particular sense. And don't worry if they've uploaded any files, those files are not deleted. They're still attached to wherever they would be attached to. Deactivating user does not remove the files. Profiles pretty much tell you what your user can do in the org. So what I mean by that, it specifies their object access, it specifies their field access, it specifies their app access, it specifies their record type access, it specifies all these things that they can do. They're saying that if there is an account that they have access to, these are the things that they can do then. So we can, like I said, with profiles and permission sets, we can see what assigned apps they have. We can see the tab that they have access to, the record types, page layouts, object permissions, field permissions, custom permissions, login hours, and login IP ranges as well. So those are all the things that we can set up on a profile and permission set. Just some more examples. So just some things to keep in mind when you're setting up profile types. Chatter profiles are standard. They can't be edited, they can't be deleted, and there's no data access. If you have a chatter profile only, you don't have access to any of the data, you don't have access to chatter, and you can't modify any of those profiles. Your standard profiles, these are the ones that when you get Salesforce, they're the ones that come with their standard user, system admin, things of that nature. They can't be modified, they can't be deleted, but they do have access to data because they're granting access to your data. Then custom profiles. These can be edited, they can be deleted, and they also have access to data. Typically, as a best practice, when you need to create a custom profile, you find a like profile. It can be a standard or it can be custom, and you clone it, and then you make edits to your new profile that you see fit. So if I have a read-only account, read-only profile, and I want to make a little more advanced profile, I could take that profile, clone it, and then update the profile to meet my needs. Permission sets are, I call them the exception of the profile. Users can have many permission sets, but a user can only have one profile. So that's one thing to note. You can't have more than one profile. I have my profile that I have. That's kind of my core starting point. And then from there, I can add permission sets to enhance my permissions within the org. Common practice would be like if we have a sales profile, all the sales team members get it, but we may have a manager. We may create a permission set for the manager, giving them some additional privileges that they need to do their job. Grant that permission set to that particular user, but they still have that sales profile. So the sales profile gives them their base, and then the addition of the permissions that gives them the additional features that they need within the org. A newer feature within Salesforce is permission set groups. It's one group that has permission sets in it. So if we have permission set 1, permission set 2, permission set 3, we can create a permission set group and put all the permission sets in there. And I can assign that permission set group to an individual. So then they gain access to all these 3 permissions. Pretty cool tool, especially if you have a lot of permission sets. You may have a particular one that particular users need, another set of users need a different type of group, permission sets for that group. You can create multiple groups, have multiple permissions in there, and then assign permission sets as you see fit, or permission set groups as you see fit to this individual user. So it's a really great tool to speed up the process, so that way you don't have to assign 15 or how many permissions that you need to that particular person. You can put them all in one group and then assign the group, and then you can reuse that group for other users going down the line in the future. This is just a example of a permission set group. It's called sales processing. We have 2 permission sets in here. We can assign that out as we see fit. We can add additional permission sets if we need be. If I did check one here, I can remove it as well. One thing to note, you can add up to 100 permission sets to a permission set group. So if you have that many, you can do that. If your org has a large number of permission sets, using permission set groups might help improve performance. When viewing permission set groups in the list view, no actions are available in the list view drop-down menu. If you include session-based permission sets and permission set group, the permissions and them do not require session-based activation for users to assign to the group. When a permission set is part of a group, you can still assign the individual permission set apart from the permission set group and to specify users in need. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go here to this help article from Salesforce and check it out there. So one of the cool things with permission sets is that we can actually mute something. So we can add our 3 permission sets in our group here, but then we can add a muting permission that only applies to this particular group. So what we can do is we can create a permission set here. We're going to create a mute permission set. And what it's going to do is it's going to negate whatever is in one of these things. So if permission set 1 gives me read access to account, permission set 2 gives me read and edit access to account, and permission set 3 gives me read, edit, and delete. And my muting permission set removes the delete. It's going to mute that delete permission here. If I were to take this muting permission and remove, let's say I'm going to take away read access to that, the permission sets all here would all lose their read access within that group. So if they can still gain access to the account through other means, either another permission set group, or their profile, but within this group, that permission set is muting. So if you assign a bunch of permission sets to someone, there may be something that you're hesitant about giving away access to, you can create a muting permission to negate that addition of that particular permission set. So like I said, only applies within the group. Anything outside the group, it still works as designed. There's 4 layers of data access. There's the organization. First of all, do I have a user? Once I have a user, if we have login hours or trusted IP ranges or login IP ranges, do I fall within the limits of those, or am I able to log into the org? Once I have access to the org, my profile is going to dictate what objects I have access to. Also, my Salesforce license could point me in that direction as well. So my license and my profiles permissions, I can tell me what objects I have access to. Once I have that, my record, so my org defaults. So what level of access do I have to the record? So just because I have access to the object doesn't mean I have access to all the records in that object. So what are my org defaults? Role hierarchy, sharing roles, team and manual sharing. We'll cover this in a minute here. Now, at the very last layer here is the field. Can I actually see the value in the field on the record, which is typically done through field level security. And you can kind of hide it with page layouts. If they have access to the field, they can still pull reports and other means as well. So you can kind of hide it, but it's not a true level of security. We need to gain access to the org. Then we have access to objects. Then we have access to the records on those objects, and then potentially the fields on those objects. If I don't have access to a field, and if I have access to the record, I just won't see the field on that particular record. So there's a special field here that's hidden that only one person can see it. Only one person can see it. They can still see the rest of the values on that particular record. With organizational security, this is basically the entry of the org. This is where we can set up our users, our password policies, our login access policies, multi-factor authentication. You can set that all up here. You can set up your settings for your password policies. What happens when somebody locks himself out? How long are they locked out? That type of deal as well. My domain is a great security feature as well. This is my current dev org here one. It allows me to gain access there. By setting up a domain, it just allows users to log into that domain. You can set up special permissions that say you can only log into your org through that domain, so you can check your domain. A lot of the newer functionality within Salesforce also requires you to have my domain. So one of the first things you can do typically when you get a brand new org is set up my domain. So objects on your profile, with profiles and permissions, you get to see what objects users have. There is the read, which means you can see the record; create, which means you can make your records; edit means you can modify your records; delete, which means you can remove records. So that means you can remove that record, view all, and modify all. These are the ones I typically don't like to utilize very much because they have special permissions that kind of override everything else. So view all means if I have view all on account, I can see all account records no matter what. Modify all means I can see all account records and modify them regardless of needing the sharing. So if you use view all, modify all, be careful with it. Typically admins have that type of access. You may not want to grant other additional access to it just because it does override any of the sharing that we're going to talk about coming up here in a little bit. At the field level, we can select the individual field. We can say if it's visible or read-only. Visible means that if I have the ability to edit it, I can edit it. Read-only means that even if I have the ability to edit the record, if that's a read-only field, I can't modify that particular field. So you can have a layer within a layer. So if I can edit the account, but I make the field read-only, I can edit the account, but I can't modify that particular field. So that's kind of a cool little functionality that you can put in there to keep certain fields safe and secure. So one of the things to note, profiles and permission sets versus sharing. I always say your profiles are like a driver's license to tell you what you can do in Salesforce, but just because you have view access to accounts does not mean you get to drive all the records. So if I can create records, if I can modify them, if I don't have access to any records, it doesn't mean anything. So if I have access to accounts, doesn't mean I get to drive the Batmobile and the Bat bike. Profiles and permission sets. Profiles are like a driver's license that tell you what you can do in Salesforce, but just because you have read access on your account doesn't mean that you get access to drive all the records. There are plenty of scenarios where I have read access to account, but I don't read access to my particular records that I own. So sharing plays a vital role. So with record access, you define with record ownership, you view and edit the record, transfer the record, you can also delete the record based on the profile permissions. So typically we start with our org-wide defaults, or OWDs as we like to call them, and then we add our role hierarchy, then we add additional sharing rules, and then we add teams and menu sharing. So these are the main mechanisms of sharing records within your org defaults. Is your starting point, your role hierarchy grants access vertically, sharing rules grants access horizontally, and teams and menu sharing as your that's your. So this is how you gain access to records along this track. Depending on what your org defaults are, this may become a very flat raise. It could be a very steep raise. So typically this is the way we go. But if our org defaults are public read write, these other parts don't really matter too much because everyone already has access to those things, providing that the profile gives them access to the record. There is a way to grant access and then take it away. That's with restriction rules. Essentially, you build out a restriction rule to take away access to a record if it's been granted through one of these other ways. So it's a way to hide those specific special records that you may not want to have everyone have access to. So org defaults, these are your default settings. These are underneath your sharing settings. And you have one for your internal and external. So this is being your communities or experience sites. And this is within your org. So there's public read write, which is what you see here, or transfer if it's for leads and cases. They're special. They have a special transfer option. There's public read write, public read only, and private. Private means that only the owner of the record can see it, and then it has to use that chart we just saw to grant additional access to the record. Public read only means everyone who has access to that particular object can see all those records. Public read write means that everyone who has access to those objects, and if the profile states that they can modify it, they can do that as well. So just because my profile says I can, just because my profile says I have read access doesn't mean I get access to other records if it's private. But if my org settings is public read write and my profile says I have read access, I still don't have read access to the records. I can see all the records, but I can't modify them. Role hierarchy. This grants your access vertically. It's used for record access and sometimes editability. A lot of times it's used to grant access to of a manager to all the particular peoples below. So in the scenario here, we see Alfred's up top here with the Batman below him, with Batwoman and Robin reporting to Batman. But Alfred kind of helps Batman out here, so he needs to see everything that Batman needs to see. So we just put Alfred on top of him so that he can see everything that Batman sees. We could have used a sharing rule to do that as well, but in the scenario, this is what we thought best. If your organization-wide defaults are more restrictive, then public read-write use a role hierarchy to make records more accessible to users. Role hierarchy doesn't really play a big deal when it comes to sharing visibility if your org-wide defaults are public read-write, because everyone already has access to the particular records. All your standard objects use the role hierarchy. Your custom objects, you can choose whether or not if you want to share that particular record via the role hierarchy. All right, sharing rules. There are two types. There's owner and criteria. The first one you see here is your owner-based. So based on the owner of the record. So we're going to say if the record is owned by one of these things, we're going to share it with another person or group. And depending on what type of object it is, if this is the account, we can grant access to the account, and also the opportunity cases, we can specify those additional accesses. Private read-only read-write. If we grant access and we want to hide other things, we make it private. We can say, well, if we're going to grant access to the account, we can give you read-only access to the opportunities. We can hide self cases. Our read-write means that we have the ability to edit. Once again, all these things are dependent on your profile. If your profile can't modify an account, it doesn't matter what permission you get, you can't modify the account. Same thing goes if I do write a sharing rule and I share something with somebody with an object that they can't see that record either. So if I make accounts public read write and I create a profile that has no access to accounts, that particular user who has that profile can't see any of the accounts because they don't have access to that particular object. Criteria based. Essentially, you set your criteria here. So some type of condition on the record. And once that condition is met, it can be shared with one of the groups or users. Same concept applies with the level of access as well. Just a different way of sharing that particular record. And then manual sharing. One thing to note, your org-write defaults can be private or read for the button in the show. If your org-write defaults are public read-write, the buttons I can show because there's nothing to share because they already have access to it. When you set up the access here, you identify the user, and you can grant the access to the account, case, or opportunity. This is another scenario where we're granting access via the account. If this is just a custom object, you'd only see the object access, not the other two special case in here because of the account. Team sharing is available on account, case, and opportunity. This is where you can ad hoc teams, and you can also set default team sharing. So on the user, you can set the default team sharing for an account or case or opportunity. And then when a user creates one of those records or is a shared from those records, you can identify whether or not the additional people need to be added to that account via the team sharing. All right, thanks for sticking around for this session. Come back next time. We want to talk about the Object Manager and Lightning App Builder. Thanks. See you around.